Hello and welcome to Liberty Wolf, episode number 30. My name is Zach Strong, the creator and host of Liberty Wolf. Today is June 5th, 2021, one day after the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre in China. Let's not forget about that. Today I want to speak about something that is 30 years old. I thought of a symbolism for 30, and I finally came to something that's so important. It's been a passion of mine. This year is the 30th anniversary of the fake fall of the Soviet Union. Now, some of you might think, what? Fake fall? What are you talking about? The Soviet Union collapsed. It fell. It went away. No, it didn't. And maybe that's a new concept for a few of you, but listen up. So what I'm going to do today to commemorate the 30-year anniversary of this massive deception to fool the West and to lull us away into a false sense of security while world communism advanced, I'm going to read a little bit. Reading's not the best thing in the world to some people, but it's important because there's so much information that can be said maybe better than I can say it, and from a whole bunch of different sources. So I want to quote these sources, tell you about them. Now, all of these quotations that I'm going to cite today come from a book. I happen to appreciate this book. It's written by me, Red Gadiantons. It's all about the communist secret combination conspiracy. It's in a broader version of my first book, A Century of Red. A Century of Red is a little bit shorter. It's more for a secular audience. This is more for a religious audience, specifically members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But there are a lot of information here, especially the last half of the book, the second half of the book, that can be digested by any audience as long as they have ears to hear and eyes to see, because there's a lot of truth that's contained here. So what I want to do then is quote from Chapter 8 of my book. Chapter 8 is called The Fall That Wasn't. Now, let me first, though, tell you why. Why am I so passionate about this? Well, when I was about 12 years old, I had a moment that was a very transformative moment for me. I was living in Idaho at the time. I was actually in Hanson, Idaho, and on my dad's school computer. My dad's a school teacher. After school sometime, I was reading online, just various things. I was always a very interested, curious person, wanting to read more, learn more about history and politics and the whole works. And so I was reading something, and it talked about communism. And it said that the Soviet Union had never fallen. It was a stage play. It was a carefully crafted ruse. In this quote, it said something like this, as best as I can remember, that the greatest deception or the greatest ruse ever foisted upon an educated public was the oft-repeated phrase that communism is dead. Something to that effect. And when those words, entered my mind, I had this very spiritual experience. The Holy Spirit of the Lord rested upon me, if you will, and it just flowed through me and confirmed that this is true. This is not just some conspiracy theory. This is real. And the Soviet Union didn't go away, and all that implies. Now think about it. What does that imply? If the evil empire, the Soviet Union, this murderous regime that was fighting for world domination, if it didn't actually collapse and transform itself into a semi-democratic state over there in Russia, then what happened? If it was all a ruse, a theater production, a stage play, then what are the consequences of that? What are the implications? What does that mean? Does that mean we're still in the Cold War and that we just haven't been fighting it? It's been being waged against us, but we haven't fought it yet for all these years, 30 years? There are some massive implications there that I think need to be examined in your mind. Now, maybe you don't believe me, but I think you owe it to yourself to at least contemplate what that would mean if it's true. And I'm going to sit here today and tell you it is true. I'll testify that before the throne of God. It is true. The Soviet Union never collapsed. Communism never died. It was a false flag operation. It was total fake. Okay? It was a deception. Sun Tzu, right, the famous Chinese strategist, in his book, The Art of War, he said something that I'm going to quote here. He said, "All warfare is based on deception. Hence, when able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. Hold out baits to entice the enemy. Feign disorder and crush him. If he is secure at all points, be prepared for him. If he is in superior strength, evade him. If your opponent is of choleric temper, seek to irritate him. Pretend to be weak, that he may grow arrogant. Attack him where he is unprepared. Appear where you are not expected. Now, the general who wins a battle makes many calculations in his temple ere the battle is fought. The general who loses a battle makes but few calculations beforehand. Thus do many calculations lead to victory, and few calculations to defeat. How much more, no calculation at all. It is by attention to this point that I can foresee who is likely to win or lose. So if this is true, if this is a true principle that Sun Tzu is talking about here, that those who prepare and have long-term strategies, and many calculations, if they are the ones who are going to win, then what does that say about us? We haven't even been fighting this Cold War for 30 years. But the Soviet Union, which is now called the Russian Federation, and all of their various satellite states, and and China, Red China doesn't even pretend not to be communist. It's in their constitution that they're a communist state, or that they're a socialist state led by the Communist Party, and they follow Marxist, Maoist thought, is what they call it. It's a communist state. They don't even hide it. And so, what does that tell you? If all these people have been waging this war continuously for 30 years, while our focus has been on some sort of Islamic boogeyman, what does that tell you? Who's ahead? Well, it's not us. We're not ahead. So let's go ahead and start here by quoting from Lenin. What did he know about communist conspiracy and strategy, right? In 1920, he gave two statements. First one goes, all the capitalist countries of the world which were united in the war, World War I, against us, against our terror and our system, are forced against their will to enter into trade agreements with us, knowing full well that in this way they are helping us to strengthen and secure our system. The second quote, it is necessary to bribe capitalism with extra profit, and we will get the basics with the aid of which we will strengthen ourselves. We'll finally get up on our feet and then defeat it. Yeah, they're not duplicitous and conniving, are they? Yeah, so here, this echoes, I guess it was beforehand, so it's not an echo. But this foreshadowed, I guess, what Dmitry Z. Manuelitsky said at the Lenin the Lenin School of Political Warfare in the 1930s. He gave a speech, which was recorded, smuggled out, I guess, of the Soviet Union. Anyhow, here's what it said. I think this is one of the most profound quotes. And this is another one that I read around the same time, back when I was 12, that has stuck with me all these years. He said this, quote, war to the hilt between communism and capitalism is inevitable. Today, of course, we are not strong enough to attack. Our time will come in 30 or 40 years. To win, we shall need the element of surprise. The bourgeoisie will have to be put to sleep. So we shall begin by launching the most spectacular and unheard of concessions. The capitalist countries, stupid and decadent, will rejoice to cooperate in their own destruction. They will leap at another chance to be friends. As soon as their guard is down, we will smash them with our clenched fist. Pretty interesting, huh? So 30 or 40 years after the 1930s would be what? That would be 1960s, 1970s. What happened during the 60s and 70s? There were massive peace protests everywhere, right? And those peace protests were funded by the Soviet Union. If you go look back at it, the KGB really helped orchestrate. They pumped in millions and millions of dollars to fund peace movements here in the West, in the United States, and elsewhere. Now, I believe, and this is my theory that I've put forward in my books, is that this 30 or 40 year time frame was delayed and pushed back by World War II. World War II was basically started by the Soviet Union, and they allowed it to happen. They had the power to stop it. They didn't. They wanted it, and I've quoted that in my articles here on my website, redalertnewsletter.com. Go subscribe there if you want. And I've quoted it elsewhere, that they started the Second World War, their agents. And they did it for the purpose of taking over Western Europe, and then from there, using that as a springboard to conquering the rest of the world. And so they maneuvered things towards that end. But they were preempted by Adolf Hitler. And he attacked in Operation Barbarossa because he knew their German intelligence showed that the Soviet Union was piling up forces, the largest army that had ever been amassed at that point in history, on the border, ready to invade. And so he preempted them in a secret attack. And so this delayed the whole thing. German blood bought more time for the world before the strategy could be really implemented full time. And so that was delayed. If you look, take a number of years back or forward, I guess, in time, and then start the 30 or 40-year cycle that they talked about before they could start their deception, that matches up pretty well, in my view, with a 1991 collapse of the Soviet Union. And so I believe right now we're in that period. Started long before, 30 years ago, but actually started in embryo state before that. But we're in that period where all these massive concessions to the West, all these peace overtures are going on. Now that we're at the end of that period before World War. It's coming. It's not. I'm not one of those who say, "Oh, it's imminent. It's going to happen tomorrow. October surprise." You know, people have been saying that for years, and every time they say it, it's wrong because there are signs that haven't happened yet that have to happen before that war is going to start. And so we're not there yet. It's very close, but not yet. And it's on the horizon. You can see all the forces there. So get ready for it. Get your family prepared. Nuclear war actually is very survivable if you're not an idiot. So you do not live on a military base that's a target. Do not be in that area. Do not be in the massive cities that are going to be targets. Do not place yourself and your family in that danger zone. Don't do it. If you don't do it, you're most likely going to survive the war. Or at least you're going to survive the nuclear attacks. Okay? All you have to do is use a little common sense. People laugh and mock the old-time videos about duck to the ground, and those actually work. There's an account that I read from a policeman in Japan who survived the Hiroshima bombing, the atomic bombing. He survived it by ducking to the ground. And so, I mean, in the immediate aftermath, he fled the city. He went to Nagasaki. Guess he had bad luck. When he was there, he told his fellow police officers there of how he survived. He ducked to the ground. So he told them, hey, if this ever happens to you, there's this massive blast, duck to the ground behind something. They did when the second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, and most of them survived. It's really not that difficult to survive a nuclear explosion unless you're immediately in the blast radius, or immediately outside and you take no precautions, such as taking potassium iodine immediately to stave off the effects of radiation poisoning. So it's actually highly survivable. ki4u.com. Go there. ki4u.com. Go there. Read it. Read the good news about nuclear destruction, I think is the name of the article. Really fascinating. Great information. Buy some Ki, potassium iodide tablets. Keep it in your packs, your bug-out bags, whatever. So this was a little bit of a tangent, but get ready because war is coming. It's not imminent. It's not tomorrow. It's not next week, but it's coming. And these forces, these evil, satanic forces of conspiracy throughout the world, they want the war, but they want it at a certain time. It has to happen there's a special sequence. And so it's not happening yet. Don't lose your mind, but get prepared. Be logical. Strategically relocate to a better location out of the cities, away from military bases that will be primary targets of war. Get out quickly. Flee Babylon. Find a safe spot. So, I want to continue here, right? This long-range deception has been launched by the Soviets. Here we go. This comes from Stalin. Okay, he said this in 1924 in his book, The Foundations of Leninism. He said, quote, "It scarcely needs proof that there is not the slightest possibility of carrying out these tasks," of setting up socialism, communism, "in a short period, of accomplishing all this in a few years. Therefore, the dictatorship of the proletariat, the transition from capitalism to communism, must not be regarded as a fleeting period of super-revolutionary acts and decrees, but as an entire historical era, replete with civil wars and external conflicts, with persistent organizational work and economic construction, with advances and retreats, victories and defeats. The historical era is needed not only to create the economic and cultural prerequisites for the complete victory of socialism, but also to enable the proletariat, firstly, to educate itself and become steeled as a force capable of governing the country, and secondly, to re-educate and remold the petty bourgeois strata along such lines as will assure the organization of socialist production." So, again, Lenin said, hey, our time is not yet. We have to hoodwink the West, and they'll fund their own destruction, essentially. Then Stalin said, just a few years later, yes, this is a whole historical era. It's going to take a while. We're going to have some setbacks, but we're going to stay on this long-term goal. Manuilsky said, our time is not yet, 30 or 40 years. We're going to put on this massive peace campaign and trick everyone, and then we're going to smash them with our clenched fist. Okay, so all of these Soviet leaders have said the same thing. They've preached it openly, in secret, everywhere. Okay, so we're going to jump forward a little bit here. A few pages later in my book, we're going to go to Mikhail Gorbachev. He was the Soviet dictator when the fall happened. All right, so I'm going to do a little aside here. He was an occultist. He is an occultist. He has been visited by his own admission to a U.S. diplomat. He's been visited by a demonic entity known as Lord Maitreya. It is my theory that Lord Maitreya he's the leader of this hierarchy. It's called the hierarchy. These 12 brothers or ascended masters of wisdom. The White Brotherhood is another name. They basically ruled mankind, supposedly. I believe it's Satan and his angels who appear to people, and they're directing their work of destruction throughout the world. You have Benjamin Krem, who was basically the prophet, the forerunner prophet, the John the Baptist type figure of this coming Antichrist, Lord Maitreya. And he talked about how all these various world leaders, including Gorbachev, had been visited by Maitreya, had been given special tasks. So this other diplomat, I believe his name was Wayne Peterson, he wrote in this book, what was it, Extraordinary Times, Extraordinary Events, something to that effect. I didn't come prepared with that. But anyhow, he wrote about how he was in this meeting abroad, and he said, I have to keep the name secret because most of these people are still in power and they can't have the public knowing about this right now, but they are followers of Lord Maitreya, and they all admitted it openly to me in the secret meeting. He said, but there was one person there that said, I don't care if you use my name, and that was Mikhail Gorbachev. And so he'd been given orders by this demonic entity that appeared to him to collapse the Soviet Union. So this is a little key that Alex Jones, Joel Skousen, all these various experts have never mentioned. At least I've never, in all of my research, have never seen these guys mention it. It's extraordinarily rare I see anyone mention Lord Maitreya and these ascended masters who are actually governing all of this long-term plan. They're the ones giving the information, appearing supernaturally and spiritually to these people and saying, hey, do this, do that, here's the plan, do it now. These demonic entities are all over the world giving information to leaders, including in our own country. There's evidence of that. But anyhow, please be aware of that fact. Now, so Gorbachev then, he's in a good position to be in the know about what actually happened with the so-called fall of the Soviet Union, right? Since he was in charge. He said this in his book, Perestroika, New Thinking for Our Country and the World. He put to rest the idea that this was some big reformation. He said this, there are different interpretations of perestroika in the West, including the United States. There is the view that it has been necessitated by the disastrous state of the Soviet economy, and that it signifies disenchantment with socialism and a crisis for its ideals and ultimate goals. Nothing could be further from the truth than such interpretations. Perestroika has to a far greater extent been prompted by an awareness that the potential of socialism has been underutilized. The works of Lenin and his ideals of socialism remained for us an inexhaustible source of dialectical creative thought, theoretical wealth, and political sagacity. His very image is an undying example of lofty moral strength, all-around spiritual culture, and selfless devotion to the cause of the people and to socialism. Lenin lives on in the minds and hearts of millions of people. Turning to Lenin has greatly stimulated the party and society in their search to find explanations and answers to the questions that have arisen. The essence of perestroika lies in the fact that it unites socialism with democracy and revives the Leninist concept of socialist construction, both in theory and in practice. Such is the essence of perestroika, which accounts for its genuine revolutionary spirit and its all-embracing scope. Perestroika is closely connected with socialism as a system. Does perestroika mean that we are giving up socialism, or at least some of its foundations? Some ask this question with hope, others with misgiving. To put an end to all the rumors and speculations that abound in the West about this, I would like to point out once again that we are conducting all our reforms in accordance with the socialist choice. We are looking within socialism rather than outside it for the answers to all the questions that arise. We assess our successes and errors alike by socialist standards. Those who hope that we shall move away from the socialist path will be greatly disappointed. Every part of our program of perestroika, and the program as a whole for that matter, is fully based on the principle of more socialism and more democracy. Close quote. This is Gorbachev. His words. He wrote a book. It's in there. And there's God confirming it with a lightning strike and thunder. I think that was caught on film, or on the tape there. Honestly, this is This is the admission. This is the smoking gun. It's right here. You have the dictator in charge saying, you're all wrong. We're not looking outside of socialism. Socialism didn't go away. We're looking back to Lenin. We're getting more Leninism. We're injecting the system with Leninism. He admitted it. It's right there. It's in his book. How can you keep saying perestroika and glasnost were some amazing reforms that happened and the Soviet Union went away? It didn't happen. It's admitted. It's in the book by the leader, the dictator at the time. He admitted it in a book. So don't believe me, believe the Soviet dictator. Okay? He'd also said this previously in 1987 to show that this had a lot of forethought. Okay, now this, some people dispute this quote occasionally, but it comes from pretty good sources in my view. He said this in a meeting. Gentlemen, comrades, do not be concerned about all you hear about glasnost and perestroika and democracy in the coming years. They are primarily for outward consumption. In the coming years, there will be no significant internal changes in the Soviet Union other than for cosmetic purposes. Our purpose is to disarm the Americans and let them fall asleep. Let them fall asleep. Americans are very good at falling asleep. We forget every 4 years, oh, the people we just voted for screwed us over and were traitors to the Constitution, broke their oaths to us. Oh, well, I'll vote for them again. That has an R next to his name, or there's a D next to his name. So we are very forgetful. We are sleeping giants, as some people call us, but we're very, very fast asleep. Now I want to go ahead and quote a few more statements then from other researchers and authors who have come to the same conclusion that I have, both spiritually and through my intellectual research. First one comes from a wonderful author named David in Balmforth. This comes from his book, America's Coming Crisis, which, again, I read this around the same time as I read all these other things. There's this couple-year period where all of this it was very formative for me. And in this book, America's Coming Crisis, he said, quote, "This treacherous ploy of Gorbachev and the Soviet-Russian hierarchy has been accomplished, and the so-called collapse of communism around the world is nothing more than a continuation of a clever stage production possum act strategy that was created to promote the unilateral disarmament of the United States." So, Ken Bowers, Balmforth is the other guy. Ken Bowers, he wrote a book, Hiding in Plain Sight, all about conspiracy. It's one of the best books, if not the best book that I've ever read on conspiracy. Go pick it up. Ken Bowers, Hiding in Plain Sight. He said this, quote, "Don't be fooled into thinking that communism is dead because of glasnost or perestroika. The communists, including Gorbachev and Putin, still believe they will take over the world with their own brand of the New World Order. The members of the worldwide conspiracy think that they control communism, or at least are able to influence it, but the communists think differently. It's kind of like trying to control a tiger by putting a leash around its neck. The Frankenstein monster of communism created by the international conspiracy could easily turn on them. For that reason, there is an excellent chance that communism could attack the West and start World War III. Not only is it an excellent chance, in my view, it's inevitable, it's immutable, it will happen, it's decreed, there's nothing going to stop it. World War III will come, and it will be started, in my opinion, by the communists, I think by Red China specifically, but I believe it will happen in Asia. I think we're going to see a Middle East war happen first and kind of throw things into more chaos in the world, likely between Israel and Iran or one of the various Russian proxies in the Middle East. Here's the thing, just as an aside, the Iranian Ayatollah was trained in Soviet Russia. He's their puppet. The Palestinian Liberation Organization head, Mahmoud Abbas, guess what? He was trained in Russia by the Soviet Union, by Soviet intelligence. In Syria, guess what? Their regime is a puppet regime of Russia. So all of these various states in the Middle East are Russian-controlled to a very, very large extent. China is even coming into Iran and other countries in the Middle East. Iraq, I mentioned this before. Most of the oil that supposedly the United States we didn't get. It went to China. It wasn't about oil. So come on, people. The Middle East is dominated by Russia, by the communists. Okay, so I think there's going to be a massive war there. It's going to be bloody. Obviously, there's going to be the final battles will be fought there, Battle of Armageddon and all of that, before the Lord returns in His massive second coming. That everyone will see. I said the word massive. That's kind of a strange adjective, isn't it? But it will be seen by everyone globally. But there's going to be a whole lot that leads up to that. Various appearances and spiritual manifestations on both sides, evil and good. Be prepared for it. Get in tune. Spiritual discernment. Turn it on. You need it. And so anyhow, you have this global conspiracy, and Russia is right on board with it. China, yeah, they're on the same page. They want control, hegemony. Okay, and there are various authors that have pointed this out, and I think the war is going to begin in Asia, possibly over Taiwan, maybe on the Korean Peninsula, but either way, it's going to start there. Even just in recent times, this week, I'm talking, you have the U.S. government talking about how, we're going to be ordering a lot of new weapons, not the small weapons that we use in Iraq and Afghanistan, but massive, big, technologically advanced and superior weapons that will be used primarily in Asia. They're talking about it right now. It's going to happen. Everything's that Asia pivot. Well, Asia is going to be the ground zero, I think, of the coming war. So look out for that. So anyhow, you have these various authors backing up and supporting what I'm saying here, that the Soviet Union didn't go away, communism didn't collapse. Okay. Here's another one by Christopher Story. I believe he's a British author. He wrote The New Underworld Order. Interesting book. He said, quote, "Given that the collapse of communism was orchestrated by Soviet intelligence with extensive clandestine financial engineering assistance from the West, it follows that the communist dimension of the world revolution dialectic, including its drug trafficking and organized criminal operations, have remained not just intact, but hugely invigorated by the predicted realization that the West has remained fast asleep while this strategic deception proceeds in accordance with the Soviet revolutionary blueprint initially formulated by the Comintern in 1928 and upgraded after the death of Stalin." That's a very long sentence, but it's all truth, pure truth. Okay, let's see here. Jumping forward a few pages. Here's a quote from General Jan Senya, if I'm saying the name correctly. He was a Czech communist defector, pretty high level, obviously a general. And he said this: "The ultimate victory of the communist revolution is the red thread that runs through all Soviet policy, no matter what new chieftains rise or fall." Putin. sorry. So it is a precise, long-term commitment to which all planning, whether economic, military, cultural, or whatever, is harnessed, just as are all activities in the intelligence and propaganda fields. I could actually go through and list a whole bunch of quotations on this, where various Russian defectors, Soviet defectors, have said, look, it's all a deception. Things have actually been reinvigorated, that word we just cited. It's been doubled, tripled, quadrupled. The efforts of Russian intelligence, their hacking, for example, is far more massive today than ever before. China's theft of information, it's on just a biblically mind-blowing scale. We're being hammered right and left. The United States has always been considered the main enemy by the Soviet Union. And it still is the main enemy of Russia and China, Iran, all these other proxy states today. So here, let's see. I got another quote for you. That's what I like to do. I like to quote quotes. Let's see. So you have Mark Hitchcock. He wrote in his book, Russia Rising, about the Middle East. He said, "Putin's grand goals are to destroy the West by breaking up the European Union, dividing NATO, frustrating and unnerving the United States, and expanding Russia's global influence. On all fronts, Russia seems to be succeeding." How can you deny that Russia and China are succeeding at screwing the West over, especially after the past year and a half of the corona hoax? How can anyone deny that? We're in the Great Reset. What's being reset? We're being reset to follow the Marxist standards that they're trying to set up for us. Okay, here's Anatoly Golitsyn. Well, in my mind, he's the most accurate of all the various Soviet defectors. And which is funny because the Soviet Union sent other defectors over to counter his testimony, to make him look crazy, like he wasn't a real defector. He's just feeding you a line of bull. And so the intelligence community originally accepted his testimony, and then they've distanced themselves from it and basically call him a conspiracy theorist now, even though everything he said almost has come true. He wrote a book called New Lies for Old, where he said the Soviet Union, this was like 20 years beforehand, he said the Soviet Union is going to fake its collapse. They're going to fake this big Sino-Soviet split. They're just going to pretend that everything's deteriorating, but it's not true. So he said it before. He wrote it in a book. So how can you say, oh, this guy was a conspiracy theorist if what he said beforehand, detailed, wrote from personal experience, came true? Guess he's just a good guesser. Well, even if he's a good guesser, well, then he was still correct, whether he guessed or whether he said it from real information. Okay? So he said this in his book, New Lies for Old. The conclusion was reached that if the factors that had previously served to forge a degree of Western cohesion, that is, communist ideological militancy and monolithic unity, were to be perceived by the West, respectively, as moderating and disintegrating, and if, despite an increase in the Soviet bloc's actual strength, an image was to be successfully projected of a bloc weakened by economic, political, and ideological disarray, then the Western response to communist policy would be feebler and less coordinated. Actual Western tendencies toward disintegration might be provoked and encouraged, thereby creating conditions for a change in the balance of power in favor of the communist bloc. In other words, common logic suggested that the bloc should proceed towards its aim of worldwide victory for communism by forging its own unity and coordinating its own policies as far as possible in secret, while at the same time undermining the unity and resistance of the non-communist world by projecting a misleading image of its own evolution, disunity, and weakness. This was, in fact, the hidden essence of the long-range bloc policy adopted in 1958-60 and the basis of the various strategies developed from then onward in the execution of that policy. Close quote. So again, you add 30 to 40 years onto that 1960 date. What do you come up to? About 1991. Remember Dmitry Emanuelski, he said 30 to 40 years we'll be ready. Okay, well, 30, 40 years later, oh no, we're going away, we're collapsing. No, it's all stage production, guys. Now, beyond this, he said this in the same book. He said, the impressions that the influence of ideology is declining, that the Soviet Union is evolving from an ideological into a conventional national state, that there is a struggle between the Soviet Union and the communist China, and that the communist bloc is disintegrating, are all false. He went on then in his next book, The Perestroika Deception, which he wrote after it happened, after the actual deception he had been talking about 20 years previous happened. Then he wrote a book saying, look, I told you so. And it was over 90%, I forget the number, of the predictions he made came true. So again, not some crackpot. Anatoly Golitsyn, he said this: the central domestic purpose of the strategy in the final phase of perestroika is to renew the regimes in the Soviet Union and other communist countries, and to convert them into states of mature socialism with a human face, in order to promote the external strategy of convergence. These regimes must be acceptable to the West for convergence purposes. Thus, the strategy goes far beyond domestic political restructuring, since it is aimed at the restructuring or reshoeing of the West, the reform of Western attitudes and policies, and ultimately at the peaceful conquest of the United States and Western Europe from within. Again, this is the Great Reset. They're resetting us. So perestroika, the reforming, was for us, for the West. Quote, going on, the essence of the special maneuver within this strategy is the creation of secretly controlled opposition movements and the use and manipulation of them in a transition to a spectrum of new democratic or democratist, non-communist and nationalist power structures which will remain communist-controlled in practice. It is these renewed regimes which are intended to achieve the global hegemony of communism by means of convergence on communist terms of the former communist and non-communist systems. The West has failed to comprehend the deceptive control nature of the new democratic and non-communist structures which have been introduced in the USSR and Eastern Europe. The West is jubilant that former so-called dissidents, seen as members of the persecuted political opposition, are now becoming presidents, premiers, members of government and parliament, and ambassadors in these new structures. For the communists have succeeded in concealing from the West that this so-called political opposition of dissidents has been created, brought up, and guided by the bloc's communist parties and security services during the long period of preparation for perestroika. The bloc's political and security potential have been fully deployed in the interests of the strategy. Gorbachev and his strategists are not true Democrats and never will be. They remain committed to socialism and communism. They are a new, smoother generation of revolutionaries who are using democratic reforms as a new method based on Leninist principles of achieving final victory. Obviously, I could continue on with this quote from this wonderful defector who risked his life to come here and warn us. But go read his book, The Perestroika Deception, and New Lies for Old. They'll tell you the story. So, what else should we quote? Should we quote anything else here? One more. How about that? This comes from Pravda, which it means truth, which is ironic. It's one of the Russian state-controlled media outlets in Russia. In November 2014, they boasted in an article that, quote, the West, having discarded Russia, had been cutting its tanks and destroying tactical nuclear weapons. Russia, feeling its own weakness, kept all tanks and tactical and nuclear weapons. As a result, Russia overcame the inertia of collapse and started reviving its power, while the West, being lulled by sweet daydreams of the liberal end of history, castrated its armed forces to the point when they could be good for leading colonial wars with weak and technologically backward enemies. The balance of forces in Europe has thus changed in Russia's favor. When the Americans realized that, it was too late. You can hear the rain. Rain is a symbol of a number of things, one of them being sadness. It's sad. It's sad that all of this information was out there in the public. We were warned by defectors, and then we turned a blind eye. But of course, our elite, I think they understand, or at least a lot of them, the real true higher-ups, they understand that this was all for show, and that one day there's gonna be this massive war. All right, that's the Hegelian dialectic. You bring two opposing forces into conflict with each other to create this new synthesis of what you really want. So we're in this period immediately leading up to the World War that's going to be the true capstone of the Great Reset, to reset us, to reform us along Leninist, socialist, communist, Marxist lines. It might not be called Bolshevism or communism, it might not be called Marxism or Leninism, but it will be a socialistic, communistic system. There's no difference in the two. It's the same set of principles. It's all there in the Communist Manifesto, the 10 planks, right? Taking over education, taking over the economy through a national bank like the Federal Reserve. So you have all of these various points that have been instituted already. We're far gone on the process. We're a long ways down, and we're preparing for this final death blow. You know, that clenched fist that Manuelski said will hit us when they're ready, after we've been put to sleep, after Lenin said, we'll put them to sleep, and they'll cooperate in their own destruction. This is coming. It's happening. They're winding up to uppercut us and take us out once and for all. We're the main enemy. They've planned. They made their many calculations to destroy us for all these years, and it's coming. It's going to be hardcore. Get prepared for it. I hope that something I've said today jogs you and wakes you up, jolts you into awareness that, wow, this was a carefully crafted ruse, that this is a stage play. It's political theater. It's kabuki theater. It was all planned, put together, packaged very nicely with a little ribbon by the KGB, the GRU, all these various entities. As Christopher Story said, there was financial interest from the West that aided in hiding Soviet money. A lot of this wealth was put into the Red Mafia, the Russian Mafia, which is the most powerful in the world. They collaborate with a lot of nations. Israel, for example, is a big one. So you have this truly international conglomerate, this fusion of evil that is taking place. It's a giant ruse that fooled people into forgetting about the enemy. Yeah, we're sitting there. Oh, the bear went to sleep. He's hibernating. We don't have to worry about the bear. Well, it's springtime. The bear's woken up. And you're looking the other direction because you forgot about the bear now. And he's about ready to take a piece out of you. That's what's happening. That's where we're at, guys. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of more time because I think these statements really speak for themselves. Go look up the books. Look up Gorbachev's own testimony, Perestroika. Look up the book. You can actually find it online. Go look it up. Go read it. See what the Soviet dictator himself said. You'll be shocked that, wow, the Western media are either total dolts or they're liars and complicit in covering up this fake fall. You'll see that they said, no, this is all socialism. It's Leninism. Where nothing fell. It's all cosmetic. Vladimir Putin is not a Christian. He's not a good man. He's a murderer. He's invaded countries. They just created 20 new units they're in the process of creating them by year's end that will be placed on the western border with the Baltics, Belarus, Ukraine, all those states to counter so-called NATO aggression. Yeah, it's not NATO that's been invading Ukraine. It's not NATO that invaded Georgia. Those are lies. This is Russian territory. This is the sphere of influence of the old Soviets. We don't control them in their sphere. They do. They're the supreme masters over there. And they've done all of this to fool us. It's a long-term strategy, a long-term plan being orchestrated from above, Satan and his followers. This is a satanic war It's a continuation of that war in heaven that the Apostle John talked about in the book of Revelation. The dragon, Satan, he has gathered his forces together. He's using the Russians, he's using the Chinese, he's using the Iranians, he's using other forces. He's even using the United States sometimes. There are a whole lot of good people here left in the United States. Armed, good Christian folks that have a heritage of freedom. So I try not to knock the United States too much. When I do, I'm focused on the traitors, not on the average person, because this is still the best country in the world by far. It's not even close. What are you going to compare? What are you going to compare it to? China? There's no comparison. Germany, Sweden, where people are just running around, the immigrants, gang raping people, beheading people in the streets. No, there's no comparison anywhere in the world to the United States. We are truly the land of promise, the light on the hill. And we need to remember the principles of 1776, those things that made us great. We need to remember this. And we need to get that spirit of our forefathers, the anti-tyranny spirit, the sic semper tyrannis spirit. And we need to stand against the internal communist threat first of all. Abolish the Communist Party, which actually was already outlawed during the Cold War. We just haven't had the cojones to follow through and do what needs to be done to eliminate them, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, all these openly communist groups. We need to eliminate the communist cancer in our midst first, and then we can turn around and face the rising dragon and bear who are ready to attack us in a very coordinated, long-term plan. The key to that is understanding that communism is not dead. The Soviet Union never collapsed. It's all a big ruse, and you've been had. Admit that. Maybe it's hard, but admit it. Because the truth is better. The truth is empowering. The truth will set you free. So admit that truth. Share this video with other people. Let people know that communism is the world's greatest threat. Bar none, period. And that's all I have to say today. So long live liberty, and sic semper tyrannis.